Liftoff in 3, 2, 1.
Hey there, writing cadets! Welcome back to season 2 of Moving Right Along, the podcast by young writers for young writers. We're your hosts, Ray,
Ruby, and Kat.
So, to kick off our new season, we are being joined by a very special guest today, Shirley Anstis, who is a counsellor and writer and is here to help us discuss Black History Month. Hi Shirley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, thank you for having me. Yes, I'm Shirley Anstis. I'm a counsellor and writer based in the UK, and this is a good time to talk about Black History Month and other things about identity, who we are and how we write and how we experience words, etc. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
And we're all very, very excited to have Shirley on, by the way. Anyways, so yes, this is our episode today, which we are kicking off with the new year, right, Ruby?
Yup, and as they say, new year, new us, but I promise we barely changed. And the podcast had a really great year in 2021. Since we launched, we made our first season. And as New Year's go, people sometimes make New Year's resolutions. So as a podcast, we do have a few resolutions for you guys. And we're hoping to go more into video content and actually just to survive season 2. So it's going to be a great year. And while you're here, Shirley, we wanted to ask, do you have any personal or writing or just any sort of New Year's resolutions you'd like to share?
Mine is around just staying healthy because I'm juggling family, parenting, spousal work, clients, writing, and trying to keep well as I age. So that's the main thing, is to stay mentally and physically well so that life is, fun and enjoyable.
We can all agree with that. For the topic of today's episode, February in America is Black History Month. And although it is November in Britain, we decided to go with the February one in America. But this is a very important month for so many people across the world. And today we'd like to talk a bit about the importance of this month for Black authors specifically.
And that's why we have the lovely Shirley with us today, who has written a book about Black British MPs. For those of you who don't know, as I was informed by my American co-host, they're like, what are MPs? MPs are members of parliaments. And she's also written another one about nicknames in the Caribbean. So now we're going to move on to asking Shirley some of the questions that we have. So some of these questions are ones that we've come up with, and some of these are ones that our Instagram, people wanted to know. So yeah, let's get into the question.
So for the first question, we want to know, what made you decide to start writing?
So I've always been interested in writing and words, and I enjoyed writing at school. My dad was an English teacher, so I couldn't sort of leave the writing. I had to come home and continue with speaking properly and all of that and learning words. He actually taught me for a while, which is highly unusual and very interesting experience having your parents teach you. But then I went on to university and always doing sort of degree, masters, dissertations, and sort of liked writing. And I had it as an idea that one day I was going to write a book or two. And I was working on a couple of projects, but quite hesitant and scared of putting something out there because, who asked me to write anything? What do I have to say? And then my sister passed away quite suddenly. And it just reminded me that life is, you have no idea how much time you've got. And when she died, it was just an impetus to, okay, you're scared, but just put it out there and see just do it, complete and go. Because I was working on 2 when she passed, and she helped me with one of them, doing some research, the nicknames one in the Caribbean. She was living there at the time, and she helped me get some interviews and stuff. So she knew about it. And then the other one came out of her death and me thinking about identity and who we are and how we live, etc. So sort of 2 books were happening really. But yes, I realized time was short, and if you've got an idea and you want to put it into the world, have a go and see it. The worst people can do is ignore it, probably. So that's okay as well. So I realized I thought I can cope with it being ignored. That's fine. In fact, the wrong attention is more what I'm scared of. So I thought, have a go. And that was, 2009. It's been a while. And then there's been a long gap from those 2 books to now. So.
Oh, yeah, I think that's a really beautiful story about how we all find our inspiration to find writing and stuff. And it doesn't really matter if people ignore it, because at the end of the day, if it's what makes us happy, that's great. And we have a question from someone on Instagram, mkitten17 asks, how did you find your writing style and what drew you to nonfiction?
I like nonfiction because I like the reality of it. I like knowing, like with the nicknames, I found people I could talk to about their nicknames. It wasn't, maybe I'm not yet ready to go into a fully imaginative process. I do creative writing myself. I do it in therapeutic writing in workshops. I have the odd poems, which I've been looking at just in preparing for this. And I thought, no, I don't want to read any of these. But with research, when I can say this is somebody's story, it probably links to the counseling side of me when I'm talking to someone about their life and they're telling me about their issues and their challenges. It's really their story. And with the book on Black MPs, it's their story. I don't have to. And I try to tell it balanced, and I try to not be biased one way or the other, just telling the story. And I think sometimes we overlook how stories can tell us so much about who we are rather than trying to create. But, at some point later in life, I may actually put lots of small stories together. I don't think I'll write a big novel, but I think I can do short stories. And I have a few short stories, very short. So one day they might become something. But all fiction is inspired by real life anyway. So there is an overlap there. But I'm not yet, I don't have the capacity and time for creating something from nothing right now. It's much easier to interview people. So some of it is time and yeah.
Yeah, I love that way of looking at nonfiction, like as other people's stories that you're telling. That's like such a really wonderful way to look at it. But our next question is, what inspired you to become a counselor? And do you think becoming a counselor has impacted your writing in any ways?
Well, I think it does focus on the idea of story. As I was saying, everyone has this journey that they've been on. We've born somewhere, then we've had this experience of childhood, this experience of adulthood, maybe workplace not going well, maybe relationships break. The story just continues and it changes as it goes along. And I love that in counseling, you get to speak to someone about what's happened in the past, looking back and looking forward where they want to get to, and then helping them with this middle bit where there is some sort of challenge that you're trying to help them unravel. And I think that's inspired some of the writing as well. It's very interesting to look at that in a holistic way, I think. Becoming a counselor was an interesting thing that I did after becoming a careers advisor. So it was working with young people for a while and realizing that their challenges, some of it was to do with them, but some of it was to do with the family that they came from. And that got me interested in family stories and how young people start life depending on what your family tells you, whether university is expected, or you're expected to go to work, or you're expected to have a professional job, or you're expected to go to get the nearest and easiest thing that you can get at 16. And so all of those sort of family structures, it made me reflect on how we're raised and how we grow, really. And that sort of brought my interest in counseling to the fore. And I'd done psychology previously, so it was just joining up those bits really together.
That is very cool. And the next question is, what do you think are some of the most important contributions that Black authors have made to the writing industry?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer, because it always depends on who you are and what's touched you over the years. So anyone who answers this is saying from their own personal perspective, which of course is fair enough, but it can't be it's not I grade this 10 points and this is 2 points, or it's just what have I come across that I like is more than the Black authors in the writing industry. I mean, that's so vast, and I haven't read a tenth of the book in the industry, so it's just because there are so many. And it's but I was thinking of a few poems I've liked over the years. So And Still I Rise by Maya Angelou is one I really love. That's one of the ones that have touched me. I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, it's very well known, but it's still a powerful piece of writing. There's a poem I've been using and someone else has used in writing workshops called Dreams Deferred by Langston Hughes, which is about what happens when a dream is deferred. Does it dry up, or does it explode, or does it? And that's a really interesting thing to think about. I use that in a goal setting workshop with writing, and it's sort of what happens to your dreams when they're deferred. So they're powerful pieces that I like. There's Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman, that she said at some important point in history, which the Americans will know more than I can put full context to, but I remember that being quite powerful. I can do this and that, and ain't I a woman? And that's a really powerful piece of writing as well. So Yes, there are a few of those. There are probably things by James Baldwin, if I can remember right now. But yeah, there's lots to explore and be touched and moved by, and we find what connects us to something real, and that's follow that scent and see where that leads you.
Yeah, when you were talking about Maya Angelou, she was one of my favorite authors. I read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings as a kid, and it was just one of the most beautiful and devastating pieces of literature I've ever read. It's, if anyone hasn't read it, I would definitely recommend going and reading it, because it is really, really amazing. It's super. And another book that I think is one of, like, when you're talking about how everyone has different ideas or some of the most important contributions, one of my favorite Black authors is actually Mallory Blackman, because again, I grew up reading her book. And if anyone's looking for a recommendation, Noughts and Crosses is an amazing book, where it's basically a sort of a race flipped world where, like, white people are black people and black people are white people, and it's really, really interesting and highly recommend it. So what made you decide to write a book about Black British MPs? And again, for our American audience, MPs are members of parliament, not anything else.
Yes, not anything else. Yes. And just a few more Black authors, British authors, I guess, because I was thinking American, but recently we've had Black and British by David Olusoga, which again is based on reality. It's nonfiction, but it's looking at the story of Black British people and that story over the generations. And yeah, there are a few others. Well, with Black British MPs, this came from my experience as a careers advisor and working with young people who felt that they saw Black people portrayed on TV in the UK, at least, and possibly internationally, as sports stars or musicians or those jobs, and couldn't see other jobs that were desk jobs or engineers or jobs that were hidden. And when you try to interview someone and expand their horizons for who they could be, it was still coming back to, this is what I see. And there is something about, if you don't see it, you don't know it's possible. And so you go back to what you're aware of. And I follow politics off and on, but I was aware that quite a few, a high percentage of MPs, Black MPs, were elected in 2019. The number was higher than normal. And I thought, those kids, I've left careers, but still my heart is there at some point. And I thought, they wouldn't even know of this. They're not reading the papers that tell you about politics. At the moment, everybody knows too much about politics and it's all very skewed and mad. But certainly at that point, it was still, people are reading their music of their favorite stars and following social media. And I thought it would be nice to take that knowledge, that information, and package it in a way so that it's accessible for young people, so they have this book that's just enough of each MP for them to know that there are Black MPs in Parliament. They come from different backgrounds. They're Black African, they're Black Caribbean, they're Black mixed with British, and there are 22 of them, so it's not it's a small number, but it's still more than they used to be. And you could pick this off the shelf in the school library and sit one lunchtime and see that, it's possible for me to do that if I wanted to. But also these MPs, some of them were engineers, some of them were PR people, some of them were journalists, some of them were, so it gives you all these other career paths as well. There's the odd, I don't think there isn't, I think, is there an athlete? One of the women was a judo champion or something, so there is still that range of athletes and other people as well. But it's mostly, the scientist, there's a chemist, there's a cancer specialist, there's all these different career paths that could lead you to an MP. So again, it's saying you don't have to study politics to become a member of Parliament. And also it could be a second, third career. And also it's more than what you think is possible for you to be when you grow up, when you're older.
Yeah, that's really powerful, like giving kids the opportunity to really see what they're capable of. I really love that. For our next question, as a Black author, what has your experience with writing and publishing been like?
So I sidestepped some of the challenges by, I attended some publishing workshops and how to get a publisher and how to get an agent, and then just thought, oh, this is too hard. This will take a year, because I know no one. I have not just graduated from a top university with a first class honors from Oxford. I'm not the people that publishers are seeking to give contracts to. I am on my second career, so I thought this is going to be hard to get an agent. And my ideas are so unique and so one-off. So one of the things you need to do is prove there's a demand for your product. Well, no one was looking for this Black British MPs, but before I wrote it, there was no, they wouldn't have found in any marketing group whether people were looking for this. They weren't searching for it in Google necessarily. So it was, but I've written it, and now people are interested, and people are getting copies, and that's great. But I thought there was a need, and I wanted to do it even if nothing sold. I wanted it to be there as the first and only one of its type, and that felt like this is what I had to do. So instead of spending a year trying to find an agent and then trying to find a publisher, I thought I'd self-publish, and that's what I've done all 3 of my books, really. So and that's because it's a part-time thing. It's because I have the counseling as the front and forward, but this I can show someone now. I can complete, I can write, I can finish it, I can do the research, I can deliver. And if and when there's another idea, perhaps now with 3 books, I may try and approach someone. But so far, it's been avoiding all the pain. I've never been rejected because I've never applied.
That's the dream.
I'm not jaded yet. I think it's possible.
I agree, though. I think doing something for yourself, writing for something for yourself is always more important than what other people are going to think of it. So I really like that perspective. I appreciate it. But on top of that question, we would like to ask, how do you think the writing community as a whole can be better at supporting these Black authors?
I think things like this is quite useful, this sort of podcast. And I think there are a few other podcasts and book clubs and Black girls writing communities. I've seen a few online, and I've not joined, too busy, but I know that they exist. And I think also sort of perhaps there could be more mentoring from some of the established publishers, but I certainly know they're doing more Q&As, and they're doing more sort of pop up to this webinar, we'll tell you all about the process. So it's often you can find the first level of entry, you can find information around that, but who supports you on the way. Maybe it is peer support that's required. So and I see quite a bit of that happening at the moment. So it's encouraging, I think. But again, I'm not trying to get my first novel published. That may require some extra input from someone who's connected. And
in your own opinion, what do you think are some of the most common / harmful stereotypes about Black people found in writing, and how can writers avoid harming people and using these stereotypes?
I struggle with that. I find that quite difficult. I guess, yeah. I mean, none of us are one-dimensional, so I don't know what stereotypes there. Yes. I mean, sometimes I don't finish things if they annoy me. So, I don't have to. I think if you pick up a book and you don't agree, or you think it's not what you want it to be, then you can always put it down. But I think we're not one-dimensional, and I think sometimes you have to create a Black character that is not stereotypical but yet relatable. So there are these challenges about how you create that person, and people critique other people's work. None of us think our characters if I had a character that are stereotypical, we all think that's unique. And sometimes real life is so weird that people who you think are stereotypes are actually based on somebody true. And so I don't it happens, but I don't have a list of what they are, because I ignore things that I'm not interested in or annoy me. So I don't kind of take it in, because I think all that affects your creative process when you're taking in and you're trying to respond to and projecting what others might think about. And it's just, I'm a therapist, I'm me, I help you and I support you, and then we part and create new ideas. This whole kind of other people's thoughts in your head, just kind of protect that, I say.
Yeah, I think that is a good piece of advice. So it's just make them 3-dimensional. I mean, I think that's the only real thing that anyone of us can do, because as someone who is also a person of color, I also think that the main thing is just making sure that they're just a person instead of a sort of plot device or something, because that's what, when it gets annoying, when you're okay, so you just had this character in for one throwaway joke about their race or something.
Yeah.
That's, I think, as long as you make them into a person, yeah, I think
and the idea is always write from what you know, isn't it? Write the stories you want to tell, write the stories you feel have been missing or not been told yet, rather than write what you think might sell. But that's me. Someone else might just want to make a lot of money. So
and that's really a very good recommendation. I just like to put down things that are just full of stereotypes, because I think it's good to not like support books that don't portray Black people in an uplifting way. But yeah, for our next question, well, obviously beyond your book on British MPs and your book on nicknames, where do you think that people can learn about Black history?
Oh, wow. Well, there's so many good books coming out at the moment. I think there's, the David Olusoga book I mentioned, which I don't have to hand, or I might do. It's called Black and British, which talks a lot about the Black British side of it. And in some ways it's about, and I've got Miranda Kaufman, who's in Black Tudors, which again is not, when you do the Tudors at school here, they don't tell you that there were Black people around in Tudor times in Tudor England. So she's a white person, but she's writing on Black history, and she's an academic who lectures on that. And again, Black history is global. So you have a UK version, you have American, you have Caribbean history that involves Black people who were taken over as from Africa and enslaved, and you have Latin American Black culture as well. So choose a part of the world and begin to explore it, because I think it's impossible to say you have a grasp on Black history, and I think that's where people fall down when they think they know it. It's almost realizing whatever you learned at school is just, if you learn anything, it's a tiny bit, and there's a lot more to learn, and then it's global. So decide where you're going to start, rather than think I know where you come from and I know who you are. That ignorance is the worst. The worst thing here is just to know that you don't know, and begin to self-educate.
Yes, as a product of the American public education system, I can relate to that. But piggybacking off of our previous stereotyping question, there's a lot of writers out there who know that representation of Black people is really important, but a lot of us are a little bit hesitant to portray these people because we feel like it's very easy to get it wrong or portray it in a negative way. So what is your advice to writers who want to accurately portray these Black people in their own writing?
I think it's a tough job, because I think if you're, oh God, this has got so many political things, and I don't want to get into trouble with any, and I don't discuss writing this sort of world really. I just write what I want, so it's quite hard to. But I've heard discussions about, especially if people are representing somebody who's not from their cultural group, their race, whether they're getting it right or whether they're stereotyping it. But it's possible to stereotype within your own race as well. So I think anyone can do it, and it's probably still about the character feeling real and authentic and relatable and like a whole three-dimensional person. It's probably just sticking to that and doing it with a genuine good heart, I suppose. Not wanting to tick a box, not wanting to, because characters also need to be flawed. They can't be perfect, because you want every Black person to be this role model. That's why I'm doing the role models one here, and even they have their issues that I ignored. Some of them I did not include. Some of the issues that involved it. So it doesn't, I'm changing, I've just not included it, which is a different thing. But you can't create perfect characters, because we're all human and we're all flawed. So it's a tricky thing to balance your flawedness across all the races in your it's any way you look at it, it's just complicated. But it's just our modern times, and at least now we're having these discussions, and still the best books will rise, and the best books will draw in the crowds, and not everyone can like every book. So I think it's just being open to, some people will criticize, but actually if you're telling the story you want to tell and you're happy with it, then you'll begin to have a fan base, and they'll come back for the next installment. So maybe it's about conviction and going with what you feel is right for you and the story you want to tell.
We've kind of already discussed this slightly, but do you have any general recommendations for non-fiction resources? I know you already mentioned the book about Black Tudors, which is amazing, by the way. It's so interesting because you especially because when you grow up, you sort of think, especially with like certain shows and stuff, when like TV shows on like BBC decide to have sort of Black characters in like Tudor-based shows, and everyone goes, that's so unrealistic. And then you read a book like that and you're like, what? And it's really interesting. So I definitely recommend people looking into the history of like Black Tudors and stuff, because I remember when I learned that, I was like mind blown. I did not know that.
Yes, he was in the court of Henry the whatever and something else, like real people with real drawings and pictures of them. It's just, yeah. And because of that, I contacted Miranda Kaufman and asked her to give me a quote for my book, and she agreed. So that was, I was jumping up and down that day because I've never met her. Just said, I love your book, please give me and she did. As well as David, there is a new book actually that's just come out that I've got, that's called Black Joy, which is stories, again, it's people's stories of their experience, writers, etc. It's published by Penguin, and I've only just started to look at it, but it looks like it's got good stories. These are modern stories which we're telling more of, so that's nonfiction. And then Bernardine Evaristo, A Girl, Woman, Other, which won the joint Booker Prize, is fictional characters, but again a broad range of them that includes every sort of different type of Black female that there could be. So that's another way to get every, each one a unique story, but you're telling a different aspect of womanhood and girlhood, etc. So those are some great writers. There are many more. There's British with Afua Hirsch, which I have not finished, but that started off well. It's British on race, identity, and belonging. So that's another good book that it's she is often asked to go on television shows to debate someone who's saying the exact opposite to her, and she's then has to kind of be very strong to express her opinion. So it's but she's very, very clever, very.
Yeah, those are all really great resources. Thank you. So our next question was submitted by our assistant producer, Jasmine. And I wanted to ask, are you familiar with the enemies to lovers trope in romance books, where like they start out as enemies and progress into like dating, basically? And this has become a bit of a controversial topic, just in that it's entertaining, but like, is it healthy? So we wanted to ask your opinion as a counselor on that sort of an idea of somebody going from like absolutely hating each other to being in love over the progress of a book.
That's intriguing. Well, often we hate someone or are jealous of someone or anything because they trigger something within us. So it's often that similar to us or something, or they carry something that we want. So there's a jealousy there, or they show up some part of us that we, so either way, there's a deep connection, because hate is a strong passion as well. It's not someone that we can just ignore. It's not that they don't touch us at all. They do move us, but in one way. So it of course, it can progress to the opposite of hate to love, I guess, over a very long book, I suppose, and all the misunderstandings, kind of, whatever I hated you because of this, but now I see that's because of, I'm like that as well, or I've always wanted this, or so there'll be, I guess, reasons as it falls away and love is revealed. Like, yeah, it could happen, I guess. That probably doesn't help at all.
No, it's a very, very complicated trope to write, believe me. But for the next question, how do you think discussions like the one we're having right now about specifically Black people's experiences might affect young people's motivation to write their own story?
Well, I'm all for people writing their own stories, and I think it depends on if you need an audience for that story or not. So we could all blog now for free. We could all, in some of my writing workshops, I get people to write aspects of their story, and that is something you can keep for yourself. You can do something for your family. It doesn't have to be published out there. So the idea of people paying to read your story, that's a different thing almost, because then it's a marketplace, and then it's delivering what the marketplace wants. But that we can all write our story is something I'm passionate about, and which is why I do my writing workshops, which I haven't got any planned, but hopefully there'll be some later in the year. And it's how we can write from aspects of who we are, whether that's childhood or our first job or our first holiday, or what it's like to live in our skins, or how we feel going to a new country. Or there are many different ways depending on the themes, and I've done a few and want to do a few more that we can all write from, because we're living. We are a living story. We are life in action.
I think that is our last question. So, Shirley, do you have last things you want to say to our audience before we begin wrapping up?
Well, I think keep your love of words, keep writing, keep listening to your inner voice, listening to yourself, and know that what you think and feel matter, and you can record that. Just simple journaling is useful for mental health as well. It's just good to work through what's going on to help you reflect on your life, and sort of a safe place to put your thoughts and feelings as well. So whether it becomes fiction or it just stays in a journal, just keep writing and see what comes. Be open to what's possible.
Thank you so much, Shirley. This has been an amazing podcast interview, and we're really, really grateful for you agreeing to come on and the insight that you've given us. That was amazing.
Yes, thank you. And just before we go, is there anything you want to plug, like where people can find you? Maybe you could plug your books.
So my books are on Amazon, and it's Shirley Anstis. So if you spell Anstis, and that might be in the show notes, I presume. But Black British MP, Members of Parliament in the House of Commons is the latest book. You can find me at Shirley Anstis on Instagram and Twitter, and that will probably be the easiest places. I do have a blog as well, but it's living, being, doing, if you would like to see that as well. It's not very up to date, but it's good.
Well, thank you again. This was wonderful. I feel like I've learned a lot. Very happy about that. But until next time, writing cadets, and we'll see you on our next adventure.
Thank you for listening to the Moving Right Along podcast, made possible by the Young Writers Initiative. You can follow us on Instagram at Moving Right Along Podcast, or find us on tywi.org. And while you're there, why not join our Discord server, The Writers Town? Thank you to our team, without whom this episode wouldn't be possible. Our producer Simone, co-producer Jasmine, scriptwriter Dell, and our social media manager Cassette. All music is by Kevin MacLeod at filmmusic.io. Today you heard Beauty Flow, and all sound effects are from the Free Sound Project.